So apparently, if we leave the European Convention on Human Rights, Cornwall might not survive. Yes, you had that right. Forget pensions, forget food shortages. This time, the crisis is clotted cream and Celtic identity. Gotta say, credit where credit's due. This is a new one. Yep, Cornwall. Cliff tops, the Eden Project, pasty shops, tid mines, Tates and Ives, Sainsbury's tunnels. Apparently, it's all hanging by a thread, and that thread is the European Convention on Human Rights. According to Labour MP Perran Moon, if Nigel Farage and Reform UK get their wish and pull us out of the ECHR, the Cornish could lose their protected status as a national minority, because that status comes under something called the Framework Convention for the Protection of National Minorities, which is tied to the broader ECHR structure. And look, I'm not here to be mean, I genuinely respect the concern, but also catastrophic. Like, will the pasty shop shut down? Will the clotted cream curdle? Will Rick Stein have to get a French passport? Because unless Bodmin Moor is about to be swallowed up by a bureaucratic abyss, I'm going to need a little more detail on what exactly catastrophic means. And this is where I think it gets interesting, not because of Cornwall specifically, but because of what this whole conversation reveals. Let's just take a step back for a moment. For the past 2 decades, we've been told that national pride is passé. Culture evolves. Britishness isn't real. Tradition is cringe. And don't even think about calling yourself English without getting side-eyed by HR. But suddenly, when it comes to Cornwall, we're flipping the script. Now heritage is sacred. Now cultural identity needs international protection mechanisms. Now it's a legal emergency if the government doesn't sign on the dotted line for your regional roots. It turns out identity matters, but only if it's Celtic and coastal, apparently. And I'm not saying Cornwall doesn't deserve recognition. It absolutely does. It has its own language, its own history, a distinct cultural rhythm. It's not just a sandy footnote on the bottom of England. But I do think it's worth asking, why is it okay to defend heritage when it's regional or minority? Why is it acceptable, noble even, to say, I'm proud to be Cornish? But if you say I'm proud to be British, you get slapped with a microaggression in a BBC thought piece. It's like there's this strange cultural double standard. If your identity is niche, endangered, and doesn't include a Union Jack, you're good. Quaint, you're even charming. But if it's national, historical, and rooted in, I don't know, actual British history, suddenly you're a walking red flag. You'll get a lecture about empire, a TED talk on decolonisation, and someone will tweet you yikes under your photo. It's even showing up in our public bodies now. A few days ago, MPs were urging historic England to stop treating Cornwall like an afterthought, and I completely agree. They said Cornwall's history is not just a subset of English history. The school kids visit Tudor castles and Roman ruins, but rarely get taught about Cornwall's Celtic roots. And they're right. That should be corrected. But again, where was this energy when people raised similar concerns about national heritage? When people said that our monuments were being removed, our traditional festivals were ignored, or our identity being slowly eroded, the response was basically, get over it. History's messy, be modern, eat tofu, move on. And yet suddenly, if you're a small region with a stone circle and niche dialect, your culture deserves preservation, investment, and reverence. So which is it? Are we a modern nation where heritage doesn't matter? Or does heritage only count if it comes with a Celtic fringe and a funding application? Because newsflash, Yorkshire has heritage, Hampshire has heritage, even Reading has folklore. At what point does Britain just become a collection of emotionally distant counties squabbling over heritage points like it's Eurovision? Like, if Cornwall gets a little badge that says protected, does that mean that Yorkshire's next? East London? The Cotswolds? Because heritage is starting to feel less like identity and more like marketing. As long as your culture fits nicely into a grant form or a tourism poster, it gets love. If we were really serious about culture, we'd treat all heritage, big, small, regional, national, with the same care. Not just whichever one makes for good branding. Because this whole Cornwall might collapse without the ECHR panic, it doesn't tell me that Cornwall's in danger. It tells me that even the left now admits heritage is real, identity matters, and people care about belonging. So maybe, just maybe, the real issue isn't the ECHR. Maybe the problem is that for years we've been told that having a cultural identity is something to be ashamed of, unless it's local, niche, and non English. So, what did we even do before the ECHR? Britain helped build it. We were one of its founding members after World War II, so it's not some alien concept we were forced into. But now that we've left the EU and we're supposedly this proud, independent nation again, why do we still act like Strasbourg knows best? Because couldn't we just build something here? Something robust, intelligent, protective that reflects our values with our judges in our courts? Or is the assumption that we just can't be trusted? That without a foreign framework watching over us, we'll slide into tyranny and terracotta roofs? Maybe it's just me, but I don't believe that. We're not helpless or clueless. And if we don't have our framework in place by now, maybe that's the real scandal. Not that we might leave the ECHR, but that we're still acting like we need permission to stand up straight. And I hate to break it to them, but Cornwall has maintained its cultural identity for over 1,000 years. That's longer than the ECHR has existed. So maybe it's not the ECHR that holds the culture in place. Maybe it's the people, the stories, the land. Maybe what matters is what's carried in memory, not in legislation. Because I'll be honest, if you use Strasbourg to validate your vibes, something's gone very wrong at home. Because maybe the problem isn't the legal framework. Maybe it's the fact that we've been told for decades that having an identity at all is something to be ashamed of. And newsflash, it's not. But it is strange because the way we'll fight to preserve regional identity but recoil the second that someone raises a national flag. We're not afraid of heritage, we're afraid of visibility. We'll whisper Cornish pride. But British pride? That's a risk assessment. Just ask those running Operation Raise the Flag, a campaign launched literally because we've become so awkward about expressing love for our country. People genuinely don't know if it's allowed anymore. If you fly a Cornish flag, you're celebrating culture. Fly a Union Jack, and suddenly people are checking your online history. It's like cultural pride is only allowed if it's endangered. And I do want Cornwall to be protected. I really do. It's ancient, it's poetic, it's been systemically overlooked. And honestly, it's shameful that I can speak bits of French and German, but not a single word of Cornish, or Irish, Welsh, or Scottish Gaelic. Why aren't we speaking or learning the languages of this land? Why do we know more about baguettes than bodmin? But the cynic in me also wonders, is there something addictive about minority status? Sometimes being a minority becomes a kind of moral currency, that your right, your culture, your story suddenly matters more, not just equally, but more than. Of course, people deserve recognition, especially when they've been erased or ignored. But when that becomes institutionalized, baked into media, politics, social capital, it stops being about preservation and starts being about leverage. Because you can be both marginalized and quietly addicted to your moral status. You're overlooked, but also just a little entitled. So now we're left with a harder question. Is identity something sacred or something strategic? Or is it both? And if that's true, then maybe the greatest tragedy isn't that some cultures are fading, it's that we've started performing identity for influence instead of living it. Because when identity becomes a kind of game, we lose the very soul we claim to protect. So here's my question to you. Do we actually believe in protecting culture? Or are we just playing pasty politics? And if we're willing to protect Cornwall's identity, isn't it finally time to admit that British identity might deserve the same respect? Let me know in the comments below. And please, no violence over the cream or jam first debate. But do have to think about liking and subscribing. Thanks.